This is just the beginning.
Welcome to Hard Truths Higher Education, our virtual event. I'm Erica Pandey, a business reporter at Axios, and I'm coming to you today from Hoboken, New Jersey. I want to welcome our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Axios.com. Join the conversation today on Twitter with @Axios and #Axios events. Over the next 30 minutes, I'll be joined by my colleagues Sara Kehaulani Goo and Russ Contreras, and we'll unpack the way colleges and policymakers are working to address systemic racism in higher education. My first guest is Dr. Wayne A.I. Frederick, president of Howard University. He's joining me on the first week of classes from campus in DC. Welcome, Dr. Frederick.
All right, thanks for having me.
So I want to start framing our conversation with this really eye-opening stat I found in BLS data this week, and that's that in 2019, 89.9% of recent Asian high school graduates, 66.9% of recent white graduates, and 63.4% of Latino graduates were enrolled in college. But for Black graduates, that was only 50.7% of high school graduates. So I wanted to ask you, how do we start to remedy this enrollment gap, and where do HBCUs come in and play that vital role?
Yeah, it's critical that we do it early is the first thing I would say. We have a middle school on our campus that's focused on math and science. And my experience has been if you stop one of those young people in our middle school and ask them where they go to school, they'll tell you I go to Howard University. So it's extremely important, I think, to have them get an early exposure. They are able to attend different labs on my campus, et cetera. So that feel of being around college, demystifying it is important. Guidance counseling early as well as students transition from middle school to high school, I think is also another critical place. And then to be quite honest, we have to increase the number of high school graduates who are African American in order to make sure that the pipeline is larger as well.
So does Howard's work begin before students are 18 years old?
Almost certainly. We have an early learning program on our campus, primarily for employees who have little kids. And then we have that middle school. We do dual enrollment with a few high schools in the DC public school system. We think it's extremely important to expose young people early to college. And the earlier you do that, the better. And HBCUs, because of the percentage of graduates who are African-American who come from HBCUs, we represent 3% of all higher ed institutions, but we're responsible for 22% of African-Americans who get bachelor's degrees in this country. And so HBCUs are critical as well to ensuring that even more high school students of color, of African-Americans in particular, attend college.
And census data out this month is showing us that our workforce and our country is just getting increasingly diverse, which means the need for people of color as leaders, as scientists, as doctors is going to be that much more important. That stat, that 3 to 22% stat, is a huge, marker of that. Though America would be a better, smarter country if there were 50 Howards. How do we get to that point, increasing, the number of HBCUs, the number of, minority majority institutions out there?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a combination of things that we must do. One of the things is we must recognize the burden that certain institutions are carrying. So Howard University, for instance, has trained and graduated more African-American physicians than any other institution in the history of medical education in this country. That's a huge burden. Today, we still send more African-Americans to medical school than anyone else, and we graduate probably in the top 3 of schools that graduate African-American physicians. That means that we're putting an undue burden on one institution. And at the same time, we don't fund that institution as if it's carrying a burden of national importance. So we have to look at that very closely and fundamentally change what we're trying to do in order to make sure that there's equity. And then in terms of spreading that wealth, we have to make sure that the other institutions that are supporting this type of work are funded. It can't all be done by HBCUs. There's only 105 HBCUs. So we must ensure that all universities in this country are sensitive to the issue of trying to get a diverse student population and making opportunities for underrepresented minorities to be part of their education system.
I want to speak, you mentioned physicians. I want to speak a little bit more about the COVID-19 pandemic. You're obviously, a surgeon yourself. How did Howard handle the pandemic? I mean, it really exposed a lot of inequities in society. One was that a lot of students of color don't really have, they rely on the college for housing, for food. It became a challenge to handle. How did it intersect with Howard's mission?
Yeah, I would say it hit it square in the middle because we are trying to provide an opportunity to others who wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity. And what the pandemic showed is just how difficult and how disadvantaged that can be. And what we did by setting up a testing site early, getting testing for free through a very generous gift from Thermo Fisher, for setting up testing around other HBCUs as well. And then on the vaccination, really putting out the vaccination to the community early as well. All of those things really aligned with our mission because keeping our community safe was important. And the pandemic also has disproportionately impacted African Americans. So we foresee more economic disparities occurring as a result of loss of income through the loss of a spouse or partner, et cetera. So there's more to come and more for us to do in terms of educating people about COVID in general and also addressing some of the fallout that inevitably, unfortunately, is occurring and will continue to occur.
And you said, it's the first week of class this week. Are you back to normal, more or less?
Well, we're back to in-person teaching. Students and faculty are excited. I had a chance to walk around and walk in and out of some classrooms and speak to both students and faculty. And the excitement was palpable. People really are back. I've said all along that the essence of the human condition is engagement, not isolation. And the pandemic has certainly isolated us. So I think we're all very happy to be back amongst each other.
And I want to ask you, we've been talking a lot about what is still needed. I've got this great audience question for you from one of our readers from New York who wants to know, what is the progress we've made over the last 10 years? What is it that you see and think, okay, we're on the right track?
I think there's a lot that I've seen. One is that our higher education institutions are very important in our society. They do a lot of good. They produce young people who go into the workforce who are very altruistic and certainly want to make a difference in the world. And I think that we're starting to get that right. We have not been communicating about it effectively, but I think we're getting that right. The other thing I would say is that the young people who are coming through today, over the past decade in particular, are more aware of the world around them and therefore more acutely concerned about problems that may be remote from them geographically, but not remote from their passion and their concerns about it. So I think we're seeing people coming to university today who are more concerned about their mission rather than their major. And I think that we've gotten that right over the past decade, but it's something that we have to continue to underscore.
And like you said, HBCUs have a huge impact, but they are limited in number. What can just any university do, in this next coming year to make our future leaders a more diverse, more representative group?
Yeah, I think one thing that is probably not done enough is partnering with the HBCUs. I think there's a lot of opportunity to have joint programs, to have pipeline programs, to professional and graduate school, as an example. I think that's an opportunity. And I think for individual universities, I think reaching out into populations, into school districts that are predominantly underrepresented minorities would be a wise thing to do as well.
Mm-hmm. And then I just want to end by asking you, what gives you hope for the next 10 years in the education and higher education space?
Yeah, I have a 17-year-old son and a 15-year-old daughter, and they are very altruistic. I am so impressed with the fact that young people know so much about others, are willing to learn more about others, and are willing to pursue avenues of study in life that would allow them to impact others. And so I'm very optimistic because of the generation that's coming. I'm also optimistic that our faculty have seen that need in students and are trying to prepare them in a way that they can change the world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Frederick, for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sara Kehaulani Goo, for their next segment.
Thank you, Erica. I'm Sara Kehaulani Goo, the executive editor at Axios. For our next segment, I'm excited to welcome Jenny Rickard. She's the president and CEO of the Common Application. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jenny.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm happy to be here.
Well, wait, I really want to dig in with you because as we know, one of the big barriers to entry into getting into college is the application process, and there are many steps that lead into that. I think some of our viewers may not be as familiar with the Common Application, but basically it serves as a kind of one-stop shop that allows an applicant to college to apply, to use one application to apply to possibly hundreds of colleges or as many colleges, and that saves a lot of time and is trying to get at that barrier to entry. So let's start there. I wanted to talk to you about that process. How does the Common Application help remove that barrier in that important step along the way?
Sure, I can go back to our history. We started in 1975 with college admission deans and college counselors, seeing that more students were applying to college at the time when it was, a paper process, and that a lot of the questions seemed to be the same, but students were getting pretty beleaguered, even filling out one application, let alone two or three by hand. And so they leveraged the photocopier to use that as the technology to create a common form that students could just fill out once and then send to different colleges. Over time, we've evolved with technology to be now in the cloud and now serve more, not 15 when we started in 1975, but more than 950 colleges and universities from around the world. And students just need to fill out one set of information that's common: name, address, family, essay, activities, and remove sort of that administrative, logistical process from having them to do that over and over again. So that's the big barrier that we remove. But then again, the application, as you mentioned, is a barrier in and of itself to gain access to college, and we're very aware of that and really working hard to come up with different ways of helping students get through the process.
Thank you for breaking that down for us. And for anybody who's applied to college knows that this is such a time-consuming, laborious process. So removing that step sounds like one barrier you remove for some students. And it seems like you're also focused on those students who it's their first time, or they may be the first in their family to apply for college. So this process is totally new. However, tell us a little more, does that still mean that there are fewer fees in the process to pay for the application fees, or not necessarily so?
Well, we have, as one of the common elements for Common App, is a common fee waiver. So students who are low income just need to fill out this fee waiver once, and all of our members will accept that, so they don't have to pay any application fees. It's also good to note that 40% of our college and university members don't require an application fee at all.
Oh, that's great to know. Tell us a little bit about some of the changes that you made. My understanding is that about a year ago, you began this process, or even longer ago, to examine even the questions that you ask, or that in the colleges and universities wanted asked, I guess, in the past about an applicant's history. So you removed questions about school disciplinary records, and tell us a little more about that decision and some of the other questions you re-examined in the past year or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll provide some more context. I mentioned we started in 1975 and created this common form. And when you look at that common form and compare it to the PDF of the application today, they're remarkably similar. So although we've evolved as an application from a technology perspective, from the photocopier to the cloud, from a process perspective, the admissions process has not evolved in that time. And some of the questions that we're asking today that for an audience in 1975 was predominantly white, predominantly male, and predominantly upper to middle income, we're now much more diverse. We have students who are more first generation college students, and we found that students could encounter questions that would then stop them from submitting an application at all. So we wanted to take a review of our application from the lens of first-generation college students, underrepresented students, low-income students, DACA students, and what might be barriers of questions that have been asked for years and years and years, but have been accepted, but are actually pose a chilling effect for certain students. And the school discipline question is very critical when I think about the data there. It is well known that school discipline is administered to Black students at 4 times the rate of white students. So, and we know that having a disciplinary record means you're less likely to graduate from high school, less likely to go to college, and more likely to enter the criminal justice system. We looked at our own data and saw that students who just checked the box, yes, that they'd had a disciplinary issue in high school, were less likely to complete the application. So we made that decision this year to eliminate that question from the common portion of the application, because we saw that as an inequitable question. We also found that the administration of that and reporting of it differed widely from high school to high school. And so we just did not feel from an equity perspective that it was appropriate to keep it on the application. And we've looked at citizenship and geography and others, and we're continuing that.
That's so fascinating. That's just that one fact about one question having, posing such a barrier for a group of students it's fascinating. I'm interested to know, once you made this decision, did you see more reflective conversations among the community, among the college and university leadership about their other barriers to the process, either in the application or other steps? I'm curious what that led to, if anything.
We did, and I'll share with you that some of the evolution of Common App itself over the past year, as we started this evolution, it was actually prior to the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and when the systemic racism within the country was sort of laid bare, we decided that we weren't going to be neutral as an organization when it comes to equity. And so we started the conversations with our members about these questions on the application and whether or not we would be asking them on the Common App. We engaged the college and universities with us, the counseling community with us. And what we found is we just launched this year's application, and fewer than half of our college and university members are now still asking that disciplinary question on their own member screen. Which means that I know that they had conversations on their campuses about, well, why are we asking this question? Do we really need this information in the process, or should we ask it now or later? And so it has sparked conversation, and it certainly sparked conversation with our community, because we've gone from an evolution of the application to now talking about a revolution of the admission process, because it has been the same and for so many years, and the world is so different. And so we're not talking about just tweaking things, but actually creating a new pathway, not just tweaking the old pathway, if you will.
And it sounds like that conversation, really led to measurable action. So I guess in our short time left, Jenny, I'd love to know what's next. What do you think what next needs to happen? What change needs to happen in addition to some of the steps you've already taken in the process of the application and admissions?
Yeah, I think we collectively, as a group, really need to come to grips with what are we doing with all the information that we're getting, and how much information do we actually need from students, and how do we actually make this a process that students can go into feeling confident and excited. And that's what we need to do.
Well, thank you so much, Jenny, for sharing your experience and what the Common Application is doing with us to address systemic inequities in higher education. Jenny, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
And next, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Russell Contreras, for our next segment.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm Russell Contreras, and I'm the Race and Justice reporter here at Axios. Our final guest is Professor Anthony Abraham Jack, an assistant professor at Harvard in their graduate school for education. He's also the author of The Privileged Poor, How Elite Colleges Are Failing Disadvantaged Students. Professor Jack is joining us from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Professor Jack, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get started on your research, tell us about you growing up in Coconut Grove, Florida. At one point in your high school career, you were exposed to a prep school for elite students. That fundamentally changed your view of education. What happened to you and how did that change you?
Yeah, that's a great place to start because, growing up, I was always a smart kid, but I always knew that I wanted to go to school. But I had a football coach in my high school who liked athlete students, but not student athletes. And so that's actually how I transferred from Coral Gables Senior High School to Gulliver Prep, which is the prep school. And I went from, to give you one example, I went from going to a school where my smallest class was roughly 25, 30 students to my largest class was 16 students in AP psychology because everybody wanted to take it. I saw how the other half, the other top 10% really, were educated. Gulliver had a computer lab by system. Like one was Mac, one had the PCs. They had resources that were well beyond what my public school could actually provide us, even though it was an IB school. And that's how actually Amherst College found me. My coach called the coach there, do you have any students who could pass our test, get enough good on the SAT and all that kind of stuff like that? And they said, yeah, we actually got a guy this year. And that actually fundamentally changed because I went from Head Start and public school my entire life. But when I got to Gulliver Prep, that was a turning point in my life that introduced me to a range of colleges that were well beyond what my public school could do.
Now, this gets into your research. When this happens for disadvantaged students, students of color, students from working class backgrounds, you can go in two directions. One is, this is insecure. This world is not for me. I'm too overwhelmed. The other is, I want access to this. I see new opportunities. What happens when students are immersed in this world?
Yeah, the thing is, you get access to what, sociologists call cultural capital, right? Those taken for granted ways of being that are valued in particular contexts. You get an understanding of, how to interact with adult figures in mainstream institutions. You get access, you get a crash course in what college is to be, right? And so the students who are part of programs like Prep for Prep, A Better Chance, the White Foundation, and also students like myself who get scholarships to these schools, we get a crash course on what the next 4 years are going to be about. We get an understanding of permission to really almost like to put it in football terms, it's like two-a-days. We get to practice before the main show. And so the thing about it is if you take this route, you gain that particular access that, quite frankly, most public schools, because of lack of funding, lack of resources that we put into them, cannot offer. Because you're being educated with the same people who can pay $30,000, $40,000, or even $50,000 a year for high school long before they actually start their college courses in the like. And that is who the privileged poor are, right? Lower income students who go to these prep schools and then go on to college. I call those students the privileged poor because they have this kind of access. And I compare and contrast their experiences to the doubly disadvantaged lower income students who remain in their typically distressed public schools who don't have the same level of funding. Because those 4 years before school shape students' strategies for how to navigate college. Who feels okay or who's used to hearing about Canada Goose and Montclair jackets for wintertime and going to Martha's Vineyard or to Vail for vacation versus for whom is it new? Who is struggling with culture shock as a first semester freshman in high school versus who's struggling with it as a first semester freshman in college? And who's more likely to access those resources? Because colleges, sadly, privilege, they cater more to those who know how to navigate the system or who come in knowing how to navigate it already, as compared to those students who want to succeed, who want to continue on their path of mobility, but have not yet had chance to practice, let alone master these particular skills before they arrive on campus.
To stay with the football metaphor, what else happens to the privileged poor during the main show? You're in school, you're among the privileged. What are some of the things that you found in your 2-year study of an elite school of how they navigate this world that is not only foreign to them, but foreign to anybody in their family?
Yeah. One particular example that stands out is a simple one: office hours, right? The privileged poor know not only what they are, but why they should use them in school. Now, office hours is a term that gets thrown around the college campus just as much as pizza, all-nighter, and party, right? But when professors say office hours, we always say when they are. We almost never say what they are. We almost never take that extra step to explain that office hours are a time that professors set aside to meet with students to answer their questions about course material, progression through college, and whatever floats their boat, right? Whatever other thing they're interested in, whether it's fellowships, the news, education, politics. The privileged poor have been in systems and schools for 4 years that not only have office hours, but they've been taught using the Harkness method or other ways in which they have been in classrooms with 5 to 6 other people with a high school teacher who has a PhD. So by the time they get to school, they're used to close contact with faculty members. They're used to going to office hours. They're used to asking for help and asking questions. Whereas the double disadvantage, on the other hand, who come from schools that are more likely to be overcrowded and with fewer resources, they don't know how to necessarily navigate office hours. But office hours are that gateway, right, to so many different resources: letters of recommendation, help when you are in trouble, introductions to private premieres, and even introductions to headhunters, because your professor may know someone who's looking for a new intern or someone who wants to shadow them for a summer, right? That social capital, those connections that are made, if you feel comfortable in those spaces and you know to go to those spaces, you are more likely to access institutional resources as compared to those who do not feel comfortable and who do not know how to navigate those spaces.
In our final 90 seconds that we have left, your next project is going to take it a step further. When the privileged poor comes across things like spring break and their classmates go on trips overseas or to Martha's Vineyard or somewhere else, they're left to fend for themselves. Break it down on what this means to just basic things like food. What happens when there's a break of your education and one has to go look for basic things like food?
Absolutely. One of the things that I show in The Privileged Poor, and I'll be building on in the next book, is when lower income students hit that structural wall, when you still need money to be a full citizen at a university, small gaps like spring break mean something wholly different when you don't have money. When universities shut down their campuses for spring break, assuming that all students depart for fun in the sun, lower income students, both the privileged poor and the double disadvantaged, face food insecurity, right? There are students in America at Harvard, at Yale, at Princeton, and places like that who can mark hungry days on their calendar without fail because of gaps in understanding. Universities may have opened and created greater access for lower income students, but so often they have forgot to keep the doors open for those who can't afford to leave. And in the next book, when we think about the moment of COVID-19 and what these universal closures meant, not just for the day that students were forced to leave campus, but every day since, when campus is your safety net, what happens to those students? What happens to the students who don't have those kind of resources?
Tony, Professor Jack, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And thank all of you for joining us this afternoon for another virtual conversation that has made everyone smarter, faster. For more info or sign up for our newsletters, Axios Latino or What's Next, visit axios.com/newsletters or go to our Axios app. Thank all of you for joining, and we'll see you on axios.com.